Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Planning board. Okay,
Sorry.
the planning board is here this evening, and we are having an informational meeting on the PAYS application. And I'm going to turn it over to Rick Golden, the counsel for the planning board, to discuss the status of where this application is.
Okay, as Joanne correctly noted, it's simply an informational meeting because the planning board is a board of limited jurisdiction and really can only act with respect to applications properly placed before it. There is no application concerning this previously approved project, but this meeting is called to simply discuss a concern that someone has with respect to an element of that. And so we can discuss that, and John can discuss some things in particular with respect to the transformer and his discussions with O&R. But this project was approved a year ago tomorrow, and there is no pending request for site plan amendment by that applicant. But the meeting has been convened to discuss informationally about the location of a transformer that would service the property.
Can I just interject? Because I am the person with my husband who's not online. I am Nanaya Santana, neighbors exactly next door to the PAYS. Well, there's a lot of issues here going on, but maybe this is not the time to take it all up. However, when we saw the plans, and I just want to be clear, we were only invited to 3 meetings, 3, that's it. That's it. We never got notification that this project was going on, ever. We only found out because a neighbor below us said, do you know what's going on? And then we went to the village office and saw the plans. In those plans that we saw, never ever was there a discussion about a transformer by our property, nor the lines being dragged across the road, buried, and then with the transformer, ever. And then that was it. We were never, ever, ever invited to another Zoom meeting. So when this was approved, we were not there because we were not told about it. So as far as we were concerned, we had never, ever encountered this before. But one time I was walking my dogs up the road and I see this box with these wires coming out of it. And I said, well, what is that? And I called John and he said, oh, well, yes, I don't know, but we're going to find out. And he did. And he said, yes, they're going to have a pole there with a transformer because they're burying their lines, unbeknownst to us. Now, my husband has a pacemaker, okay? And this to us is unacceptable, unacceptable. Not only as a health reason, but as a visual reason. So on those 2 scores, this is pretty much unacceptable. And I am very surprised, again, that we were never notified that this was to occur. And I want to know why. How was this able to be approved without your next door neighbors having any knowledge of this? How did that happen? Why did that happen? Anyone?
John, do you
Rick,
want to
would you-
discuss the notification procedures in the code?
Yes, the neighbors were notified before this application went before the planning board. They were also notified of this application before the applicant went to the BAR, approximately a month or 2 after it went to the planning board. And the neighbors were also notified before this application went to the Board of Zoning Appeals for variances. So everybody within 300 feet of the property has been notified 3 times.
John, with all due respect, that is untrue. We were never notified, because if we were notified, we would have been on it, especially because Hume has a pacemaker. So with all due respect again, perhaps you notified everyone else but us, like we were never notified when this project was beginning.
John,
Ever.
could you describe the notification? Hume, do you want to speak before John describes the
You
notification
have to
process?
unmute yourself, Hume, unmute.
You're on mute, Hume. You're still, yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. I thought someone else had to let me in. I don't know what this is. Bear with me just a second.
No, we hear you. You're good.
I know, I'm just getting something off the screen that I didn't. So I think Nanaya is completely correct that we didn't get notice of the sort of planning board phase of this project. Neither of us saw anything. But Nanaya is making a separate, distinct point, which is that the plans that we did see when we went to the village office, having been notified by Mike O'Neill that, you know, this project was galloping forward in a way that we had no idea about. There was nothing in those plans that showed that the line was going to be buried, dragged under the road, and then reattached to a pole, which would be right next door to my bedroom window. And I have spoken to my cardiologist, to my electrophysiologist, and to the manufacturer of my pacemaker and their big rival Medtronic. And they have all said, well, without coming out to inspect and so forth, but this is not an idle concern of yours, because this high voltage wire and transformer would be close to your bedroom window, and you would be in your bed for 8 hours a day with whatever magnetic field was being emitted. And, you know, the kind of windows that you have are not going to make any difference in terms of blocking that out. So it's impossible for us to say without a careful inspection, you know, what would happen. And it's true that pacemakers today have better protection than they did 20 years ago against magnetic interference. But, you know, if you have magnetic interference, you will die, because you have no electrical function in your heart, you Hume, based on your medical records, without the pacemaker. And so I'm not an alarmist, you guys. Apart from that, so we had no notice of that pole being placed where it was going to be placed until we literally saw the sort of proto pole with the wires, you know, sticking out of it next to our property. Now, let me be really, really clear about this, you guys. This is the planning board, right?
Yes, it is the planning board.
So, Joanne, what's the sort of statutorily permitted distance between a wall, a 6-foot wall in this case, and the neighbor's property line?
We're here to discuss your concerns.
No, I'm asking this for a reason. If you could just tell me, what is that distance?
I'll defer to John Ledwith.
Yes, walls can be constructed within 2 feet of a property line and 5 feet from a roadway.
2 feet of a property line. Okay. Well, they're a little farther than 2 feet, but not a lot. And this pole, ladies and gentlemen, is intended to be erected outside the wall, closer to our property line than I would estimate.
Totally
Excuse
incorrect. Me? Totally incorrect. It's 10 feet off your property line.
I just said 10 feet. It is the pole, the proto pole, is outside the wall.
There's no pole up right now.
Of course,
the temporary service was taken down. There's going to be a pole that's going to be 10 feet away from your property line. which will be about at least 6 to 8 feet off the road area. And then
I'm
there's
not worried
a,
about the road area. I'm worried about my bedroom window.
there is no way to bring the service into the Pays residence without doing this.
I don't know how to say this.
We've been
Hold
shot
on,
down
Jet,
by
Ward,
ONR.
Ward, I'm
Yes.
just gonna
Well,
ask
there
you,
is, I live on that road and there are these transformers that are, one of them is on the opposite end of their house from us, okay? Kind of closer to the Hansons. There's a huge bunch of transformers there, okay?
Correct.
What is it
Correct.
about our house? No.
hold on,
What is it about
Ward, I'm
our
gonna
house?
ask you to speak in order here, please.
I'm sorry.
So you've raised your questions. I'm going to come back to where we started, which is the notice process. John, if you could just go through and describe what the notice process is. And as John noted, the notice process was followed both before the initial planning board meeting, the bar meeting, and the BZA. Can you describe that, John?
Yes, a letter is sent to the neighbors within 500 feet of the property initially, advising them of the application and advising them of the first meeting when the application will be discussed. We're not required to notify every neighbor for every meeting. We notify them before they come to each board, and that's what was done.
And I also wish just to weigh in with respect to what the planning board reviews and what it approves. On this application, as can be seen on the site plan that was approved.
And
Is
I'm
that-
just going to stop for a second. So Hume knows Rick Golden is the planning board's counsel.
Yes, and I know Rick Golden and have a high regard for him.
So I just wanted to be sure everybody
Thank you,
knew.
Hume.
And Ward is the Pace's contractor.
Okay,
So
Correct.
everybody's roles here.
so just with respect to the planning board, there are certain elements that need to be on a site plan that gets approved. You need to make sure that there's water and sewer lines that are being done so that it can be a livable place. And there are lots of other things that may be put on there and considered by the planning board. And there are lots of other things there, including landscaping and walls and driveways, et cetera. And whatever is on that planning, the site plan that gets approved, it's noted in the resolution of approval as to the specific site plans that have been approved. On this particular one, there is no location with respect to where the transformer is going to be. And so, and the planning board does not have an obligation to show where the transformer is going to be. When that is the situation, it is simply not part of the planning board's process of approval. So it's not approving that it's going to go anywhere. What then defaults is that it is up to the public utility, in this case ONR, to decide where the transformer is going to go. They may listen to the home in which it's going to be serviced, or they may not. They are the ones that ultimately decide where it's going to be. But the planning board really doesn't have a role with respect to where a transformer is going to be unless they have noted on the site plan where it's going to be and shown a particular location, and then it has to go at that location unless it's amended in a subsequent approval. This one doesn't have that information on it as to where the transformer is going to be. The only information that was discussed at the planning board is a code requirement that from the transformer to the home, that the lines have to be underground. And that is noted in the resolution of approval as a condition. But other than that, the location of the transformer simply wasn't discussed at any planning board meeting and wasn't made part of the site plan.
So if I may comment very briefly, if the process, Rick, is that it's up to the homeowner to disclose or not disclose, and if there's no disclosure, then the planning board takes no responsibility.
If the location- I'm
That's
sorry,
not a
go-
good process.
Well,
I'm just saying, if
No, I-
the way that things get before the planning board is if they're disclosed or not, and if they're not disclosed, the planning board says, not our problem. And the result is, bear with me, that a high voltage, power line is installed significantly closer to our house, than to the homeowner's house who's getting the power from this pole, and outside their border fence. Between their border fence, which is 10 feet from our property line, and our property. And the pole is tall. So the transformer is literally going to be at eye level with my bedroom window and not very far away from it. So that the Paises are shielded from having to not only see this thing, but be exposed to the magnetic emissions, but we are not.
I
And
completely.
the planning board says, well, that's really a pity.
When there's a minute.
Okay, but let me just respond to Hume for a second. Is that
Mr. Pais, yeah, I would just suggest that Rick respond first.
I'm not quarreling with the end result of that the planning board doesn't decide where the transformer is going. There are some times when, and I'm talking generally of planning boards, not just this particular one. I represent quite a number of planning boards. And sometimes that issue does come up as to where the transformer is going to be. The planning board has limited jurisdiction as to dictating where it's going to be. It can suggest where it could be based upon comments of the owner and comments of neighbors. But it must, in the end, be agreed to by the utility, who has the ultimate choice as to where the transformer is going to be. The planning board doesn't have the power to dictate to a utility where they're going to put their transformer. But here, there was not even anything brought up as to where a transformer is, which is, I would say, happens in almost all of the applications, is that the electric transformer is not noted, except if the transformer is going to be on ground in larger projects, and that then becomes a site plan element as to where the transformer is going to go. But on pole transformers, typically it's not raised in a site plan process. But in any event, it would be up to the utility as to where it would go. The planning board couldn't dictate where it would go.
So I would suggest at this point that it might be useful for Ward to just discuss where he believes this is going. I know that John Ludwig has had conversations with ONR, who has specified where they want it to go. And so, but Ward, can you speak to, because I think you are indicating that Hume's perception of where it's going to be is incorrect. Can you speak to?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead, Wilkie.
Just because I just want to say one thing, because I do have to step away to another meeting. So I just wanted to talk, briefly discuss, and then Brett can take over. This whole issue with the medical aspect and the health implications, to put it bluntly, and I hate to say this, but I don't know if there's a polite way to saying it, but it just doesn't make sense, and it is a bit absurd. I feel like if Mr. Steyer thinks this is a risk to his health, that he provide a letter or some sort of a cardiologist, an electrophysiologist signing something indicating that this is detrimental,
Right.
that what we're doing, the location.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. I'm going to interrupt because this is very far afield from anything the planning board has to do with, and the planning board isn't a place to go ahead and discuss whether or not there is or is not any consequence to the location of a transformer. The only thing that's relevant here from the planning board's point of view is whether or not the location was part of the planning board's process or not, whether it was on the plans or not. And we can discuss the placement of it informationally, but as far as the medical consequences of transformers and pacemakers, this is not the forum to bring that up.
Oh, I'm not asking them to bring it up to you guys, but I'm responding to the fact that he brought it up. He's bringing up that there's medical reasons, and ONR is responsible for where the transformer
I think
goes.
that he is
So,
only bringing it up.
only-
He is only bringing it up, as I understand it, simply to discuss where the placement should be. That's the only reason that it is being brought up, as I understand it. And so it's the placement of the transformer that's at issue and not the underlying reason as to why they want it in a different location.
Yeah, but he is claiming that it's affecting, he brought up the fact that it's affecting his health in a negative way.
Not
So, yeah, I
affecting
feel
my
like-
health now.
I would suggest that it would be productive, and I'm sorry, Mr. Pays, if you need to step away, but it would be productive for Ward to talk about where it's going to be so that we're all on the same page as to where it is. And then John can talk about the conversations with O&R about why it needs to be where it is. So Ward, do you want to clarify
Absolutely.
your understanding of where it's going to be?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay. I tried about 3 different ways to get this service into the base residence. At first, I wanted to tie it into the pole over by their driveway side. But there's like 3 really big transformers on there, and those are high voltage. But we also thought about tying into the pole that's the second pole up, which is near the Stires. But we couldn't do that because there was a knockout, which is a shutoff that's on top of that pole that we can't connect to. And we can't go all the way up past the Stires property because then we come in on an angle and there's all kinds of trees in the way. So I thought about going underground, cutting the road, bringing the service in underground, and then going to the property from there. But O&R said that they would not do that. They are not responsible for a road cut and they will not do it. Now, when we put the temporary service in, that was just temporary, and that was placed, as far as I could see, about 5 to 6 feet from the Stires property. But unfortunately, when we dug the retaining walls, it was in the way, so we had to abandon it. So we moved it out of the way. And then I got a letter from the electrician, which we've been dealing with emails up and back. And the only way that will bring this service into the Page residence is if it has a pole, which is across the street, and then it crosses over the road. It's 10 feet from the Stires property. It's about 1.5 feet from the asphalt where all the poles are normally located. And then from there, temporarily, it's going to go overhead about 10 to 15 feet, which we're going to put up a stanchion, which isn't that pretty, but it's temporary, which houses the panel and the actual meter, and then outlets, and then it runs to the house where we run our cords to be able to build the house. Then after we get the roof on the house, then it gets taken out and we tie in underground all the way to the house. There is no other way to bring this power into the property of the Page residents. There's no other option.
So
John,
let me
hold
ask,
on a moment. John, would you like to discuss your conversations with O&R?
My conversations with
basically-
O&R have been similar to Brett Ward's. O&R did respond to my, emails saying that they do have requirements that they have to abide by, safety related. And that's what really outlines their plan.
okay, so my question. If you're looking at the Pace property head on, correct, Mr. Ward? Are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you.
Good. So on the very right of their property, there is, I think, 3 transformers up there, correct? On a pole.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you come down towards our property, there is another pole there, which is basically almost kind of in the middle of their property, but not exactly. And then there's the one that's basically in between our property. So you've got 3 poles, 1, 2, 3, correct?
Correct.
Okay, So the one on the right, you're saying doesn't work because I don't know why. The one in
Has
the
too many
middle,
transformers.
the one in the middle doesn't work because,
It has a shut off. It's a shut off. It's a power shut off. O&R calls it a knockout. And that can't be tied into the service can't be tied there. They can't put a transformer on it. They have to put a transformer, well, no, I'm sorry. They can't tie into that pole and come across the street. They have to put it right on like on the side by the Pays property line, across the street.
but our neighbors, the Sinks, which are to the left of us, if you look at our house head on,
Okay,
they have a pole, which they did it incredibly well. They did it away from our house. Okay, they were very polite about that. And they have a pole. And then they used to have a transformer there, which they don't have it any longer. I don't know what they did with it, but it's not there. And they still have their electrical wires going underneath their property into their house.
the first thing I requested was to have the transformer on the roadside, and they wouldn't allow it. They said it had to go on the other pole that we unfortunately have to put 10 feet from your property line. These are all O&R's decisions. They're telling me what to do. My hands are tied. I understand that you don't want to see it, totally.
Okay, what about Continental Road? What's wrong with Continental Road?
If you run poles up from Continental Road, you're going to be able to see from the side and the back of your property about 1 to 2 poles and a whole bunch of wire that's going to come up and string into the front of the house. So you're going to see that from the side of your house and the back of your house all the way down to Continental Road. And unfortunately, that's going to cost thousands of dollars extra.
So are you telling me that this is a money issue then?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Is this a cost issue for them?
No, it's not. It's more of a site issue. I would prefer to have it on the road than in the back of the property. And how about the Pays? They're going to look at these poles and these wires coming across.
I'm
That's
sorry.
worse.
I think more
But Mr.
importantly,
Ward, we are
hold on a
looking at
moment.
the
If-
pole. We will be looking at the pole from our house. They will not be looking at the pole from their house because they're building a wall. Okay, so if you're going to talk
Nanaya,
about-
I think
excuse me,
the
Joanne.
relevant point here, and Rick can-
Joanne, he just made a point, which I would like to answer to, if you please. Okay, you're telling me that the Pays will have an unsightly thing to look at, and that's unacceptable. But it's acceptable for us, not only to have a thing that might affect my husband's pacemaker, but is also unsightly. That's acceptable
No, what I
And-
think
and you're saying that
what
it's a
Mr.
cost
Ward
issue
was,
for them to
I'm
drive
sorry.
Continental Road.
what
which is
Mr. Ward
unacceptable?
was saying is that O&R determines where the poles go, and that putting it all the way down on Continental is not the standard procedure for O&R. They deal with it for the shorter distance.
Thank you.
May I make an observation? I don't know how much frontage on Tower Hill Road, if we're going to assume that Continental is too far to string the wire. I don't know how much frontage the Paises have. It's got to be, 500 feet at least. And they decided to put this pole within the 10-foot extremity that abuts our house outside the perimeter wall.
They didn't decide it, Mr. Stiers. They didn't.
I'm telling you that you don't have to even bury the line under the road. That's your choice.
No, that is O&R's choice, as I understand it.
Correct.
Please, Joanne, we don't have our line buried under the road.
I know you don't. It runs straight from the pole
If-
right
if-
into your
if-
house.
If I
Mr.
may,
Ward,
if I may,
Mr. Ward, we
village
have
zone,
a
excuse me,
telephone
Well,
line.
Excuse me.
Jay would like to make a comment, to member of
Excuse
the
me.
planning board, who's an engineer.
village code specifically requires that lines be buried from the street line to the house.
Right.
That is not a choice that the Paises are making. That is village code.
So we are
Your-
grandfathered, is that what's going on?
Absolutely.
Um,
Now,
Okay, can I just say one thing to Mr. Ward? We have a telephone, our telephone line, Mr. Ward,
Yes,
comes from Continental Road. It does not come from Tuxedo Road. Okay, they actually drag it all the way up from Continental Road. That's what they do. So you're telling me, I just want to be clear about this. Stop, monkey. You're telling me that Continental Road, it can be done, which would be far away from Hume's bedroom. Okay, the transformer would be far away from Hume's bedroom. It can be done, but there's a cost issue, correct? Because when our telephone line is coming up from Continental Road, it snakes across, which by the way, the pace cut by mistake, but that's a whole other issue. It snakes across, and to us, it doesn't bother us. There's no transformer. So literally, it can be done from Continental Road.
I don't know. I've never researched it from O&R because I thought it was a crazy idea.
Is that a possibility for you to research it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can research it if you'd like.
well, be
But
responsive to our concern.
listen, I'm building this house. I don't want to have any animosity between anybody. I would like to do the best thing I can for you as well as the rest of the neighbors in the area. I will check with an O&R and I will find out if we can do it up that road. But I think you're going to see an ugly sight when you look at a pole that's going to be put in there and then another line that's going to be strung across the property all the way up to where the Pays have to have it run into their house. It's, I just don't understand it. I don't think, but listen, I'm trying to do the best thing for everybody. I don't want any problems. So I'll research it.
I
I'm
appreciate
not, may I just say that I'm not sure, and I'm just visualizing this house. But, where that line would come up to, I mean, the proposed location that O&R is suggesting is 10 feet inside your property line. And how far back is your house from the front of your property?
It is a long ways. It's like, I don't know what the distance is, but it's got to be, I would say 500 feet or better. And you're going to need 1 to 2 poles on that property line to string that up off of Continental, if they'll do it.
That is my point, is that the power will then be running parallel all the way up alongside your property, past your house to get up to the pavement.
Yes,
So
correct.
I believe if you're concerned about the proximity of power lines, the 10 feet that O&R has said that where they want it to go, and we'll estimate, let's even say it's 400 feet back from the property to your house will be a further distance than any possible traveling up from Continental.
So,
But Joanne, you understand we're
Joanne, you
talking
should understand.
transformers. The
The
transformers.
the transformer will be down on Continental Road.
It's right by his bedroom if they carry it off Tuxedo Road. This is our point,
No,
right?
that's not correct.
Pardon me?
It's not correct. They would have to put the transformer to the nearest pole to the property. So if they were, let's say, just for example, that they tied into a pole down on Continental, they would have to run 1 to 2 poles up. The second pole would have the transformer. It would go underground and then go to the house. So when you look out of your back windows on your right-hand side, because you're going to look at the side where line is proposed, I'm sure you look out those windows, you're gonna see an ugly transformer on the backside. I am telling you, this is the best situation for everybody, even though that it's not what you want.
And I'm telling you that it couldn't possibly be worse for us. And
Oh.
I'd like to point out, bear with me,
Okay,
if I understand the site plan for the Pace's house, obviously it occupies almost the entire lot, but leaving that aside, it is closer to Continental Road than our house. They have much more sort of space between their actual structure and our house. And their house is very big block. So that the power line would be coming in much, much closer to Continental Road than the west facade of our house, which is the facade that's closer to Continental Road. So it isn't true that, you know, those lines would be, you know, close to our house or anything like it. Just isn't
no,
true.
it would just be a sight, a vision, when you're coming up.
We don't
off
really
Continental.
look that way. I don't know how to
If I-
explain this.
if I
Well,
may.
that's an opinion between both parties.
No, I mean, we have no windows that look that way, Mr. Ward. That's that side of our house, and it is a
But they
blessing in this
do.
case.
Okay,
But
does-
they
guys,
do.
put a sock in it.
Okay,
Thank you. We have the opportunity, if I have heard correctly, to go to O&R and see if there's another alternate from Continental Road. They will say yes or no, and if they say yes, they'll tell us what it looks like. And when I say us, I mean the property owners. Because as Rick has pointed out, this isn't a matter for this board.
Is there
Unless I
any village
misunderstood something.
entity?
And
Is
I
there any
suggest-
village entity, John, that has jurisdiction over this issue?
Rick, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure. The planning board might have had jurisdiction if it was part of the element that was included in the site plan discussion and the site plan that was approved. So if it was noted on the site plan itself that was approved where the transformer was going to go, unless O&R says no, it would have to go in that direction. But it wasn't done here. And the approval was given more than a year ago. And there's no way to unravel what that is unless the Pays want to come in and ask for a site plan amendment. There is no other board within the village that would otherwise have jurisdiction over where transmission lines might go. But in this case, it was just not discussed. I'm not saying that the planning board couldn't have indicated on their site plan what it was. Most of the time it's not, but it wouldn't have been illegal for the planning board to say where the service is coming in from and noting on the site plan where the transformer would be. But in this case, that wasn't done. And now the matter is closed when the approval was given.
Rick, if I may say so, it should not be at the election of the petitioner homeowner.
It's not
Well,
necessary.
no, bear with me. It
Go
should, something that has this much impact on the neighbors should not be a subject at the election of the petitioning homeowner.
It
Whether
is not at the election of the petitioning homeowner. I would like you to understand that O&R makes these decisions.
Well, ultimately, that's right. But if it could have been part of the process, but it's not just reliant upon the applicant as to where they want it. What could happen is that, the neighbors are notified. A neighbor could have come in and appeared before the planning board and made a notation as that they want the transformer to be in one place. The planning board would have discussed that and made a determination, all subject, of course, to O&R, because we can't say where O&R will allow it to go, but only where the planning board believes it ought to go. And then it's going to be subject to O&R. And if they put it someplace different, there's no jurisdiction the planning board has to alter O&R's determinations in that regard.
Rick, apart from the fact that, we say we never received any notice. We didn't see any notice. this is, especially at this particular point in time, this is not where we live. We live in New York. So, you know, so we live here more than just weekends, but it is not our, you know, our primary residence. And, you know, we didn't see it. So I'm not going to get into a dispute about whether we got the letter or we didn't get the letter. We certainly didn't see the letter. And John can tell you that when we found out about all of this, we were very surprised and dismayed. So we weren't acting, John. And, you know, if you say, well, you didn't know about it, you could have come in and said, I wonder where they're going to put their buried power lines, when of course we didn't even know that they were going to bury the power line, or they were obliged to bury the power line. Our power line isn't buried. You know, but if they were to bury the power line, where would they put it? I think I'll raise that question. Rick, that's not reasonable.
Well, the thing is that, as Joanne said, you know, the planning board they have to bury it. The planning board could say, we believe that this is a good location for the service to come in off of this pole, right? They could say that, but it's really meaningless because it's whatever O&R says. And so the planning board can't enforce that. And that's why it's not normally put on site plans.
Well,
And
I get you,
O&R
but-
is obliged to comply with national safety regulations.
So
Even
let
if
me
it's
put
other
this
than that,
slightly
Joanne,
different.
it's their determination ultimately, and they
I
decide to put it
accept that,
one
Rick.
place or the
I
other.
accept that. But I think that if the village were to say, really, this proposal is extremely disruptive of, you know, the use of the neighboring property by the people who live there, could you possibly, on this relatively large piece of land, find another place to bring the power line in? That O&R would consider that. And not just from Continental Road. If the 3 poles that are available to bring the line in from Tower Hill Road, one of them already has too many transformers and the other has a stop, and the third one brings it, you know, basically through our kitchen. Maybe they should put up a 4th pole.
And that's up to O&R to do. And
Well, but if the
O&R
village were to
you-
say, it would be greatly appreciated by the village of Tuxedo Park if you would do that.
I don't know
So
that
as
would make
not
any
to
difference.
radically diminish the quality of life of the neighbors, I think that would be a good idea. And I think O&R would be, you know, at least on notice.
You know, they're on notice. I don't know what that does, but it's not, O&R is a public utility, as you know, Hume. And it isn't only the homeowner that can contact them and say that something ought to be changed in what they are planning on doing. So, I mean, you also have the ability to contact O&R and say that you would like this because of the reasons you have stated, that it ought to be from somewhere else. And they may say, well, it could go on Continental. Or we could put up another pole. But I'm not saying that there's no path forward to something that works. I'm just saying that we are in a situation from the planning board's view that they approved a site plan that was approved a year ago.
They made no mention of this issue at all.
That's right. And it doesn't.
Completely effing silent.
As it is with, I can't imagine, the only one that I remember where a transformer was going to go that was part of a site plan in the village, as I recall, was one that was on the ground. And
When was the
therefore,
last time you heard about a wire being strung within 10 feet of the neighbor's property line?
Right, I see, Hume, actually, I see that all the time in the municipalities that I represent.
Tuxedo
I'm not
Park.
saying it's,
please.
I'm not saying it's.
Tuxedo Park.
ideal. Oh, Tuxedo Park? I don't know. I don't know how close those wires go in Tuxedo Park to any of the ones that I've been involved with. I just don't know.
Outside the perimeter fence. I mean,
I-
unbelievable. And I have a pacemaker, for God's sake. But listen, I guess what I'm saying, Rick, is that I suppose I could call O&R and say, you don't know me, but I am the property owner next to the property where you've been asked to, bury a power line under Tower Hill Road and erect a pole on the west side of the road and then bring the line underground into the house. And we're the next door neighbors, and we're, utterly dismayed by the proposal, the site that you've chosen to do this. And we hope you would change it. And I could say, and by the way, I'm a lawyer, blah, 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 blah. I think it would be much more impactful if the village went to O&R, and I'd be happy to go with you, and said, we have a problem here.
The planning board has no such ability. Certainly there are, just hear me out, please, all right? Planning board, and I think you can appreciate the jurisdictional aspect of this, is that the planning board has very limited powers under state and village law as to what they can and can't do. There are elected officials, and I'm not saying that an elected official wouldn't be able to contact O&R on your behalf. And that's possible, but the planning board doesn't have the ability to do that.
Well, I'm mystified by the brief of the planning board. If the planning board of the village is unable to comment on something like this. When, by the way, had it been an element of the original site plan, which was, omitted, and I'm not saying it was, an attempt to obfuscate, but it was omitted. They say, well, now that it was omitted, we are, barred from having an opinion. You're the planning board. This is a planning issue.
Well, I mean, that's what I think you may not appreciate enough, Hume, as to, despite the fact that the word seems like it is very broad in its application of a planning board, there's actually very little general planning that the planning board does. The planning board is basically a repository for those types of applications that are authorized under the village code to come there, such as site plans, and they have a certain duty of what they can and can't do with respect to site plans, and that's it. And they either approve it or don't approve it, or approve it with conditions or don't approve it. Here they approved it with certain conditions, but it's they don't have the ability to advocate on behalf of anybody, whether it be the property owner or others, to try to contact utilities. They just don't have that ability. Now, could others do that in the village? The village is represented by various people, but the planning board is a different entity.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is we are feeling extremely ill-served by the village and by this committee. I think we have several distinct and independent objections to what's being proposed here. And we're not hearing that, we're hearing, we feel your pain. Thank you. Very grateful for that. I think, Rick, you're the village lawyer.
The planning board's lawyer. I'm no longer the village attorney.
Oh, you're not the village attorney anymore. Okay.
No.
Well, who is the village?
Brian Nugent is the village attorney.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry you're not the village lawyer. But I feel as though maybe we should get in touch with Brian Nugent and find out, what the village can do. It's dismaying to me, frankly, that the planning board can't even weigh in on a subject like this, which seems to be, in my, uninformed opinion, squarely within their, brief, whether it was raised by the homeowner or not. And to let the jurisdiction of the planning board be dependent on what the applicant puts under their nose is to have a very narrow definition of what the planning board's responsibility is. Well, if you don't mention the subject, we're not allowed to form an opinion on it.
No, I didn't say that, but the planning board only reacts and acts in connection with an application that's properly put before it. This was a site plan application that's properly put before it. It's always up to the applicant to suggest what they want to do, but the planning board has discretion with respect to all of the various elements of a site plan to decide what and where they should be.
And so if an applicant, Rick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if an applicant doesn't put on the site plan, you know, a 60-foot bright orange water tower in the middle of the property, but then builds it,
they
the
wouldn't be
planning
able to,
board
because it's,
can't say, I'm sorry, that wasn't on your site plan.
well,
And
first
we
of all,
approved that.
okay, we didn't, if that happened, then there was no approval for that and they have no right to build it. The planning board's role actually is finished once they give the approval. If they build something that's not approved, it's then up to the village to go ahead and bring an enforcement action against that person for building something that was not approved by the planning board. But the planning board's hands are no longer involved in it. They approved what they approved. If they build something different than that, they're not allowed to do so. And the village has remedies to go ahead and bring enforcement actions, both in Supreme Court as well as in Justice Court, to go ahead and either penalize them or in Supreme Court, get injunctive relief to have them, say, tear down the tower that they put there.
Well, you
But
know,
the planning board doesn't have any role in that.
I have to say that as a, you know, professional lawyer, I feel like I'm wading through a swamp of, you know, avoidance.
Well,
And
I'm not doing that. I'm trying to tell you what the jurisdictional aspects of each board is, and they are confined. And that's under state law, and it's also through the various statutes, enabling statutes. Village code has more particulars with respect to things, but it's generally by way of the state law as to what powers planning boards have in villages, towns, and cities.
And what you're saying is, well, they would have had, you know, power if the applicant had brought this subject up, but because the applicant didn't bring the subject up, we have no power.
No, what I said was that the applicant could bring that up and then the board could decide what it thought was best. The planning board could bring it up of its own volition and decide that it wanted to show where the service was coming from. Or neighbors could write in or speak to the village planning board and say, we think it ought to go here, and the village planning board would consider it and make a determination. They also could make a determination that we're not going to designate where it's going to go. But even if they designated where it was going to go, it would always be subject to the condition that it's subject to the review and approval by ONR.
That I accept, But this, we wash our hands of it. You want to take it up with ONR, good luck to you, is really, in my judgment, doing us a serious wrong. And Rick, I understand the point that you're making, but I don't accept it, because I think that if the planning board would have the authority to deal with this issue, if the applicant had mentioned it, would have had the authority to deal with this issue if they had thought of it themselves and raised it. But if the applicant doesn't mention it and the board doesn't think of it, they're divested of authority.
Once the
They can't have any
application is
authority
finished,
anymore.
once
Then
the
sorry.
application is finished, they have made an approval, they are divested of any further jurisdiction with respect to that. Unless the applicant wants to come in and say, I want to amend what the approval I have already.
Well, first of all, they didn't, you know, trouble themselves to even raise this topic in their application.
Correct?
And it is in their interest not to amend. We are the neighbors. We have no rights.
I doubt, sincerely, I don't know this for a fact, but dealing in thousands and thousands of site plan applications over 40 years, that the Pays even thought about where the transformers go, or any of their engineers thought about where it's going to go. That's sort of an afterthought. After they get to approval, then they figure out where it's going to go.
And my point,
Correct.
Rick.
Correct. That's
but
exactly it.
but my point is, I'm not saying that they had a duty. I'm saying that when the subject comes up and when it is really ripe for consideration, because in the nature of the sort of the sequence and dynamic of this process, this issue isn't even sort of surfaced until after the site plan has been approved. Then the planning board says, well, if you'd thought of it and mentioned it to us, because we didn't think of it, we would have weighed in on it, but it's too late. That is not a good process. It's not a fair process, and we're the victims.
I understand what you're saying, Hugh. And it's not just something like this. There are many times that the planning board has other governmental agencies or public utilities that require action after a planning board process has been completed, whether that be DOT, DEC, Army Corps of Engineers, and then the applicant, Department of Health. The applicant then, after they get their approval, they have to get these other approvals as well. And sometimes that alters what they thought they had an approval, and they have to get back on it. But if it doesn't alter the approval they got, then that other jurisdiction is going to dictate certain things that may impact neighbors. And that's completely out of the hands of the planning board.
And O&R makes the decisions about the polls.
And-
I've had conversations with John has had conversations with O&R about the poll, and this is where they are saying the poll needs to be placed.
Joanne, I wasn't a party to those conversations. I lack confidence in those conversations. I think that it's hard for me to imagine, frankly, that O&R would be completely indifferent to our concern if it had been thoughtfully presented. Concerns, plural. So I'm asking, please, through whatever mechanism works under the municipal law as it applies to, utility providers, that this matter be presented not just by us, because we're a very, very soft whispering voice in the wind, but by the village. That can you not find a better solution here with at least 500 feet of frontage on two roads? Surely there is a better way. If you have to put up another pole, put up another pole. It's on the far side of the road. There's nothing over there. A bunch of woods. The neighbors on that side are not going to have a problem with it. They won't. That's just woods. So I am not an expert in municipal law.
Well, the village, Qua Village, only speaks through the Board of Trustees. Right. So I think that if you want the weight of the village to go ahead and weigh in with O&R, then I think you need to speak with members of the Board of Trustees.
All right. Well, I would welcome your doing the same thing, Rick.
Me doing what?
Speaking to your counterpart who's counsel to the village.
It's really, I have.
You can report on this meeting, Rick.
I can report on the meeting, but it's something that's, the Board of Trustees represent all of the residents in the village, and they can be asked. I mean, me asking, saying that you asked me to ask them is.
I'm going to speak to them too. I'm not hiding behind your skirts. But I think it would be useful if they heard, your voice as well as mine.
If when you speak to them, you say, please talk to Rick about what went on and what were the issues that were raised. I will be happy to respond to their inquiries as to what occurred here and what discussions were had and what opinions I had and positions I took with respect to the planning board. I'd happy to do that. And if you want to have a meeting with the Board of Trustees and me, I'd be happy to have that as well, as long as Brian Nugent was there as well.
Well, of course. All right, you guys, I'm not sure how much more there is to say here. But it's, you know, the truth is that if you strip away all of the, you know, legalisms, what's proposed to be done here is grotesquely unfair to us. And we didn't have an opportunity to deal with it in a timely way because we didn't know about we didn't know about the planning board meeting. Now, John may, you know, be able to find some certified receipt. Well, he won't find a certified receipt because I promise you we didn't sign and return any return receipt for a certified letter, but he may be able to find something that, you know, is evidence that the letter was plopped in the envelope, in the mailbox. But, you know, Nanai and I never saw it. What the hell happened to it, I'm sure I don't know. And, you know, all of this happened and a great deal more besides, without our having any knowledge that it was occurring. And, you know, now that we find ourselves in this situation, this particularly grotesque proposal is, you're saying it's a fait accompli. So we'll speak to, you know, the Board of Trustees. Rick, I will ask them to speak to you. But I really hope that this board, you know, finds an opportunity, to, you know, hopefully let the village trustees know what they think might have happened, should have happened. And also, you know, considers this process, you know, with a mind to, you know, its impact on future neighbors of applicants. And this, because I feel as though we're not really getting, you know, we're being dismissed here on procedural grounds when we have a substantive problem. You know, I guess that's it, unless anybody has anything they want to say in response.
And Mr. Ward, I don't know what his first name is, he's left, but I do hope and believe that he will talk to ONR, as I'm sure, you know, Desiree has it on her minutes, that he did agree that he would talk to ONR and ask if they could do it on Continental Road.
And also another poll. If the 3 polls don't work, why not a 4th poll? We're talking about at least 500 feet there.
And also,
and it's just a bunch of wood.
That it will be unsightly for the Pays. Honestly, I don't even know how to answer that one. You know, because that was his concern, that it would be unsightly for the Pays, but never mind it being unsightly for you and also detriment possible.
I think what he was trying to say, Nanaya, was that by running it up in through the back, you, when you look out your back, will see it. He was not speaking about the Pays.
It will not affect us. What it's going to affect is the Pays, because they will have their big outdoor, you know, patio there, and they will have their pool there, and they will have their house like right there. So to be perfectly honest, the one that it's going to affect is them. It's not going to affect us. Okay, I just want to be clear about that. So for him to say that that's a concern of his, truly it isn't. Also, again, if they want to do, you know, Tower Hill Road, and if they can do another pole that is in between that transformer with the 3 transformers that's all the way on the right of the property, and then there's the middle, the shut-off valve or whatever it's called. If they want to do a pole in between those 2 and drag the lines, go for it. I think there's a lot of viable options, and no one is looking into them, because quite honestly, everybody wants to take the easy road. And for ONR, the easy road is, oh, well, let's just tap into this one. That's where it could go. We don't even want to exercise all, you know, any other options. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. We have been there 30 years, and we've never had an issue with anything or anyone. We've never complained once about anything. But this one, is an issue that we will take, because it's unacceptable to us that we're not being considered. Unfair. Completely. And, you know, I hope that you guys will take it into consideration. And I hope that Mr. Ward will take it into consideration actually, and John, you too. And talk to ONR and express these issues and express these other possible abilities for them to bring up. I have no problems with anybody wanting to bury their wires. I have no issues with anybody wanting to do whatever they want, except when it affects us directly. And this does. And that's it.
All right,
Rick, do
guys.
you want to make any concluding comments? I think the
I don't think it's
jurisdictional
needed.
issues.
No, I think everything has been said.
All right, well, the planning board is going to stay on just to approve a set of minutes.
Okay, we'll ring off, you guys.
Thank
Good to see you
you.
all. Take
Good
it
night.
easy.
Thank you.
Take
Sorry to
care.
keep you from your dinner table. Bye.
Bye now.
Good night. We just, I think we all just heard that. I think we should leave it where it lies, and focus on, we have a set of minutes from December 8th. I know Jay weighed in that they were fine. I didn't have any changes. Does anybody else have any additional changes? So can I have a motion to approve? Somebody want to stick their hand up? Jay's got his hand up, electronic hand up. I'll
Great.
second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we've approved the minutes.
The only thing I
And-
would say, Joanne, I'm sure it's obvious and Desiree would do it, but even though there was no application properly before you this evening, there's still a meeting of the planning board, and therefore minutes should be taken of the planning
Yes.
board.
Yes, I understand. And may I have a motion to conclude the meeting? Jay's still got his hand up, so I'll go for a second.
Wait a
All in
minute, I
favor?
didn't put my hand up.
Well, it's like
It was
the
Rich.
little, you got your little electronic hand up there.
You had your electronic hand up the whole time.
All right.
But I didn't do that.
I don't see it.
I just turned it off. How's it?
Well, you still got
Whatever.
a white one up there. I'm not sure.
That's okay, your hand's up.
All right, so
Just before
Portia
we-
is seconding it,
Okay,
and
sorry.
with that, we will conclude the.
If I could just say one thing, Joanne?
Yes.
Just
Mhm.
to announce to the board, I think you may all know, but I have been nominated to become county attorney for Orange County. If I get voted out of committees this month, then April 7th is the full legislative meeting that the confirmation will be had. If that's favorable, then I will disassociate myself with the firm at the end of April. The firm, if that happens, the firm will be carrying forward as Naughton and Torrey. My name has to come off of it. And so they're going to reconstitute with the two remaining partners. Certainly, you all know Ashley, and she would be continuing representing the planning board unless you decide otherwise. And she's looking forward to doing that. But I just wanted to say, since this may be my last meeting with all of you, that it's been my honor to represent the planning board for many, many years. And it's a very special place, and I will miss representing the planning board. So I want to thank you for the association. It's been wonderful for me.
Well, and it's the county's gain and our loss. We have appreciated your counsel, and I, of course, was assuming there'd be more planning board meetings before you disappear in May. But we all have deeply benefited from your guidance over the years. And we're going to get guidance going forward on this.
Yep.
So, all right, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Congratulations.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.